Hello, Math Stars. We are finally to our fraction portion of our review booklet. We're going to go a little bit out of order, and I'm going to chunk up the fraction works into smaller videos so that they're shorter and a little more to the point. We're going to start with simplifying fractions. That's page 43 in your booklet. But first I want to show you the resource that we're going to look back to for all of our fraction videos. And this is the Basic Fractions Study Guide. Fraction Basics. When you add or subtract, multiply, divide, simplify, convert, that's what those zeros mean, convert mixed numbers to improper fractions, or convert improper to mixed numbers, a fact of how fractions are related to division, when you subtract mixed numbers with regrouping, so that goes along with adding and subtracting, and then we'll review the three main parts of a fraction. Okay, so this video is going to be on simplifying fractions. So I'm going to zoom in just to that box. And this is page 41 and 42 of your packet. That you should be looking at this every day. You should be reading it. In class, we played kind of a quiz game where students had to make up questions to go along with that can be answered from the study guide. If you can explain all the facts and the concepts on these 2 pages, you will be in a really good position for the end of 5th grade. Plus, you'll have a great start to 6th grade. A lot of 6th grade math is based on fractions, okay? So when we simplify, I put a little asterisk with an S, because in our working papers, whenever we had to simplify, I use the symbol, the asterisk with an S, just to remind you to simplify. Okay, so here are the steps. You list all the factors of the numerator and the denominator. Okay, we did this in our greatest common factor video. So if the idea of factorization and finding the factors of a numerator and a denominator is confusing to you, go back and watch the greatest common factor video. So you're going to list all the factors of the numerator and the denominator, and then you find all the ones they have in common. This one only, the 8 and the 10 only have a 2 in common. And then you divide both the numerator and denominator. Whenever you see an N or a D, that's referring to numerator and denominator. You divide the numerator and denominator by the GCF, or the greatest common factor. So what should stick out to simplify is GCF. Okay, you factor out the numerator denominator, you find that greatest common factor, and that is what you divide by. So 8 divided by 2 is 4, 10 divided by 2 is 5, and that is how you simplify. Okay, so now let's go and take a look at page 43. I'll zoom in just a little so you don't have to look at the whole page all at once. I will do a couple pages or a couple problems, and then I'll show you the answer key. So there's a lot of think space on the top of this paper, as I like to call it. So make a couple think tracks. Remind yourself of what you need to do. Okay, so number 1, just rewrite your steps. To reduce or simplify. Okay, reduce and simplify mean the same thing. Find the GCF of the numerator and denominator. I'm going to write it like that because it just reminds you that that's where the places are in the fraction. 2, divide the numerator and denominator by the GCF. Okay, those are your 2 steps. Okay, now as you get along in this, you might not have to completely factor out 2 numbers. You might not have to list all the factors of the number, because the more you do this, the more you're just going to know, oh, 2 and 4, 2 is the greatest common factor. Okay, a hint is anytime the numerator is half of the denominator, you automatically know the numerator is going to be the GCF. Okay, see if there's another one on here like that. Not that I can see. Okay, so if we go to 35 and 40, if you were to factor out 35 and factor out 40, I can do this one for you, just in case you need a reminder. So when we factor out a number, you think of all the factors that go into it. Okay, always going to be 1 in itself. Okay, 2 is not going to be a factor, 3 is not, and then I can have 5 times 7. I know that's going to be the other factor. When I factor out 40, I know it's 1 and itself, 2 and a 20. 3 will not be a factor, but I will have 4 and a 10. And that is it. Okay, so what is the same? A 2 is the same. I'm sorry, a 1 is the same. And did I miss one here? I missed one. I missed 5 times 9, or 8, 5 times 8. And then the 5 will be the same. Okay, so when we factor that out, I'm going to erase it because I've just done all my workspace. So when you factored out the 35 and the 40, the GCF was a 5, and that is what I divide by. So we get 7/8. If you're confused by finding the greatest common factor and by factoring out, you need to go back and watch the previous video on the greatest common factor. And that was page 15 in our booklet. So either go back and look at page 15 and go back and watch that video. Okay, so I'm assuming you know how to find the greatest common factor and that you know how to factor out. Okay, so then I'll just go through. The GCF of a 10 and a 16 is going to be a 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. 16 divided by 2 is 8. Okay. So now for this problem, I'm going to show you what happens if you don't pick the greatest common factor. If you pick, so let's factor out 8 and a 36. Okay, we have 1 times 8. 2 times 4, and that is it. And then for 36, I have 1 times 36, 2 times 18, 3 times 12, and 4 times 9. Let's circle what is the same. A 1 is the same, a 2 is the same, and a 4 is the same. Okay, those are 3 factors they have in common. Say you don't pick out the 4 to start with, or you simplify with a 2. Because you picked a common factor, you're still going to reduce a fraction, okay, but it's not going to be in simplest terms. So if this happens, and you pick a common factor, but it's not the GCF, I will show you. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 36 divided by 2 is 18. Okay, so you did simplify, but this isn't the smallest it needs to be. Okay, all you would have to do is recognize the fact that this is not the smallest. The fact that they're both pretty small numbers and they are even should tell you that you need to simplify again. So Plan B, I always tell my class, Plan B is always divide by 2. If they're even, divide by 2 and see where it gets you. So if you divided by 2 here and you got 4/18, you would have to recognize, hey, that's not small enough. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. 18 divided by 2 is 9. Now it is in simplest form. This, you wouldn't have to simplify twice if you would have picked divide by 4 the first time. So if I am to erase this, and I divide by now the GCF of 4, I will get 2 ninths already. So I eventually got to the right answer doing it the other way, but you had to recognize that you had to simplify a second time. Okay. I'm going to do a couple more. We have 18 divided by 20. If I was to factor them out, my GCF would be 2, and I would get 9/10. Okay, 4/36 divide by 4, and it equals 1/36. Oh, what am I thinking? 1/9. Sorry about that. If I have a 6 and a 9, you should automatically know by now when you get a 6 and a 9, your 3 is your GCF. And you get 2/3. The same with 2/10. You should know right now if they're both even and one of them's a 2, the 2 is your GCF. And that is how you simplify or reduce. Find the greatest common factor. Find the greatest common factor, and then you divide the numerator and denominator by that greatest common factor. If for some reason you don't pick the greatest common factor, but you picked a common factor, that's fine, as long as you recognize when you see that fraction, you have to reduce a second time. And that is how you simplify fractions.